We're almost at the end of today's agenda, but before we go, we're lucky enough to have another speaker who can give us a real insight into how a central bank is looking at climate change.
Thank you, Lindsay, and to the organizers of this important PRI Digital Forum of the Americas Conference for the opportunity to participate. We live in an interconnected world, as shown by the increasingly clear relationship between the COVID-19 pandemic and caring for the environment. For instance, a recent study from the National Institute of Public Health in my country, Mexico, shows that air pollution makes the coronavirus deadlier. According to this research, mortality from coronavirus increases by around 8% for each microgram per cubic meter of suspended particles in the air. From an economic and financial and social perspectives, caring for the environment also makes sense. It is important that this is being recognized by markets, and especially by financial markets, which is the focus of this talk. At the NGFS, the central bank's network for greening the financial system, we have been looking at market dynamics and trying to understand the progress to this date on greening key market segments of the financial system, mainly banking, institutional investment, and capital markets across three areas: ESG reporting and disclosure, integration of risk management and financial decision-making, and capital mobilization towards environmentally friendly activities and technologies. Impact of this greening of the financial system on the real economy tends to occur through three transmission channels. Environmental disclosure and reporting acts through higher awareness among firms that leads to action. Integration of environmental and ESG issues in financial decision-making by opening up financial institutions to the use of additional relevant ESG information and new forward-looking methodologies and tools that leads to improved risk management practices and pricing and better allocation of resources. The use of this additional information reflects an increasing recognition that some ESG issues entail risks and opportunities that are material to financial performance. The third transmission channel, capital mobilization towards environmentally friendly activities and technologies, benefits from opportunities becoming more visible and is in part a consequence of the increased transparency of markets and the use of improved risk management practices. In greening the economy, investors play a key role. As investors recognize the financial relevance of ESG-related factors, demand for ESG disclosures tends to increase. This in turn triggers a higher awareness on the part of firms, generating a virtuous cycle. In view of this augmented demand for ESG data, a large market of service providers has evolved to support investors and financial institutions. Annual spending on ESG data has grown at double digits since 2016 and is expected to reach $1 billion next year. Multilateral and international organizations are also contributing to increasingly make ESG data publicly available. For instance, the World Bank launched a sovereign ESG data portal in 2019, containing a large proportion of the indicators used by ESG rating providers in their sovereign ESG methodologies. The increasing availability of ESG data by third-party data providers, credit rating service agencies, and ESG scores providers, and the increasing use of technological innovations that use digital technologies can incentivize firms to increase their own climate-related and ESG data reporting, as it provides them with the opportunity to constructively engage with investors. Firms have an incentive not to be left out. If they are not forthcoming, investors have to rank the firms based exclusively on information produced by third parties. Associations such as PRI and the Climate Action 100+ initiative, as well as stock exchanges and other actors, are playing an important role in accelerating disclosures. Signatories to PRI are committed to seek appropriate disclosure on ESG issues by the entities in which they invest, and investors in Climate Action 100+ initiative are committed to engage target companies to strengthen their climate-related financial disclosures. Over 50 stock exchanges have published ESG reporting guidance for their listed companies. Recently, the institutional investor-led Green Finance Advisory Board of Mexico issued a declaration requesting public debt and equity issuers in the Mexican capital market adopt the TCFD framework and SASB standards. Their idea is to request issuers to focus on environmental, climate, material risk factors and opportunities to improve sustainability practices. Global frameworks such as the TCFD recommendations, which guides boards of organizations and senior management in the assessment and management of climate-related risks, and global reporting standard setters that include the Carbon Disclosure Project, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, the Global Reporting Initiative, the International Integrated Reporting Council, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, SASB, are key players. However, much progress remains to be done. Firms provide information about their ESG risks and opportunities in a non-standardized manner. Firms are not required to report and disclose most types of ESG data in the same way as financial data, and are rarely subject to a rigorous external audit. As a result, the data are either not publicly available, not comparable, or incomplete. Moreover, when making this information public, it is often spread across different reports: the annual report, the sustainability report, and the corporate and social responsibility reports, which makes it costly to locate to investors. Importantly, last September, these global voluntary standard setters announced they are working together to develop a single ESG reporting system aligned with the TCFD recommendations. Meanwhile, some authorities have already moved or are considering to establish requirements or guidance for reporting also with the TCFD recommendations in mind. For instance, the EU is proposing legislation that will amend the non-financial reporting directive, which may require large EU companies to provide more detailed and standardized public sustainability information starting next year. In parallel, international financial organizations such as the NGFS and the Financial Stability Board are starting to assess the availability of key indicators and the data gaps. The existence of data gaps is seen by the NGFS as one of the key challenges to greening financial markets, as well as for the proper integration of climate and sustainability risks in financial decision making. Financial supervisors and regulators also require granular data to monitor financial stability. In this respect, the NGFS set out in August this year a working group that will be dedicated to identify the climate-related data needs of the different financial market stakeholders, to determining whether these data are available, and to producing a public list of missing data items and calling for external stakeholders to bridge them. This work will be undertaken at 3 different levels: at a country level, at a micro level, and at a market level. Financial institutions have started applying forward-looking scenario analysis and stress testing tools to physical and transition risk. However, this is not yet a common practice. In fact, this is dealt in one of the recommendations by the TCFD, and the evidence shows that this is perhaps the hardest of the TCFD recommendations to meet so far by firms. Until such practices become mainstream in financial institutions, the riskiness of legacy brown assets will not be properly understood, or may even be underestimated in highly exposed industries. Concern about environmental and climate risks has also led some financial supervisors to issue guidance to implement frameworks and strategies to manage these risks. The NGFS published around the middle of this year a set of climate scenarios that explore the transition and physical impacts of climate change under varying assumptions, with the aim of providing a common reference framework for central banks, supervisors, and the broader financial and academic communities. The first iteration explores a set of 8 scenarios, 3 representative scenarios, and 5 alternative scenarios. The 3 representative scenarios are the orderly scenario, which assumes climate policies are introduced early and become gradually more stringent. Physical and transition risks are both relatively low. The disorderly scenario, which assumes climate policies are not introduced until 2030. Action that is late, disruptive, sudden, and or unanticipated. The result is higher transition risk. And the hothouse world scenario, which assumes that not only currently implemented policies are preserved, nationally determined contributions are not met. Emissions grow until 2080, leading to a warming of in excess of 3 degrees Celsius and severe physical risks. This includes irreversible changes like higher sea level rise. Finally, I would like to turn briefly to active institutional investors, which are acting to influence the greening strategy of firms in which they invest. Institutional investors have been shifting their shareholding and engagement approach, moving from recommending to their investee companies specific actions or policies, such as disclosure and risk oversight, to a broader discussion on the impact of environmental and social risks on a company's long-term value. In the US, shareholder support for climate-oriented resolutions has grown consistently. Let me end with a word of caution. Despite the attractiveness of sustainable assets, investors should be cautious about considering these investments as means to achieving climate change goals. Corporate green bond markets are still dominated by brown companies that may not be greening. The key is to make sure that green bond issuers are greening, which is not guaranteed when brown firms finance specific green projects. Well, thank you again very, very much for the opportunity to participate in this important event. And of course, I wish a high success in this conference. Goodbye.
Thank you, Rafael. That almost brings us to the end of the PRI Digital Forum Americas. But before we go, a reminder to please complete the feedback survey that we'll be sending you soon. Thank you for participating so enthusiastically in this event, and please do continue the conversation on social media. For a few final words, I am delighted to hand over to the PRI's Director of Americas, Chris Fowle.
Thanks, Lindsay. That brings us to the end of the PRI Digital Forum Americas. I hope you enjoyed it. The past 2 days have demonstrated the huge breadth of issues that investors in the Americas are working on and the global significance of the projects you are undertaking. From climate change to human rights, diversity to deforestation, we've seen a snapshot of responsible investment activity in this part of the world. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for giving up their valuable time to share their insights with us. It's been a particular highlight to hear from speakers with such a variety of different perspectives, but that are all working towards a common goal. I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for your participation. Wherever you're watching, I hope that each of you can take away valuable insights that you can apply in your own work. We've talked a lot about the results of recent elections, and we've emphasized the fact that the view that the financial system works solely to the benefit of itself and its actors and not wider society has led to much of the divide that we see in America today, to growing inequality between the haves and have-nots. As our CEO, Fiona Reynolds, said in her opening remarks, we believe that a financial system that helps deliver supercharged profits and salaries for a tiny minority, while minimum wages are unmoving and basic health care is an unaffordable mirage for so many, we can't expect anything else but a landscape fertile for populism. And we hope that the Biden administration can begin to turn the tide. We need our financial system to be fit for purpose in the 21st century, where increasing expectations around corporate responsibility, social license, and impact have emerged. Beyond reversing the tide of anti-ESG regulation from the Trump administration, U.S. policymakers will need to advance new policies that support sustainable investing and strengthen accountability, good governance, and shareholder rights. And at the international level, cooperation is back on the agenda. We must work together to restore faith in multilateralism and in global institutions, including the Paris Climate Accord. Before closing, I want to thank my colleagues here in the U.S. and in Canada, Carol Jeppesen and Lindsay Walton, who have hosted throughout. And I'd also like to take a moment to mention the rest of the Americas team. In the U.S., working with Carol in New York is Christine Pishko, also Shaska Chirinos in Chicago, and Ophir Bruck in San Francisco. In Canada, with Lindsay, Kelly Crowder works in Quebec, and Ophir Bruck also covers Western Canadian signatories. In Brazil, Marcelo Serafim covers Brazilian signatories, and in LATAM non-Brazil, Eduardo Arquitectura, works from Colombia. I'd again like to thank everyone for their participation. I hope that you all stay safe and keep in touch, and we hope to see you in person at PRI in person in Tokyo in 2021. Thank you.